Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us and for waiting. My name is Andrea Arciniegas and I will be moderating today's session which is titled How to Conduct an Effective Market Research with our guest speaker, Sofía Maradiaga. She's an international executive and marketing and behavioral scientist. Okay, so first of all, I want to remind everyone that this bootcamp session is taking place in the framework of TIC Americas. TIC Americas is our program that we have designed to boost entrepreneurs just like you. And we are currently on the 16th edition of the competition where we have three categories: Eco Challenge, Innovation, and TIC Jalisco. I encourage you all to register if you haven't done so in ticamericas.net. And thank you again, Sofía, for being here. So now let me introduce our speaker. She is Sofía Maradiaga, and as I said before, an international executive and marketing and behavioral scientist. She was also a Chevening scholar, and Sofía finds her professional passion in solving problems through the non-obvious connection with ideas and people. She is currently working in London in the UK on a marketing and RTD project for the Americas and for Africa. Sofía has also a degree in finance and marketing and international business from the Central American Technological University in Honduras. She's an alumni of the Andrés Bello National University in Chile, and she took courses like entrepreneurship, strategy, administration, and business management. She graduated in digital marketing from Walden University in the United States, and she has also a master's degree in behavioral and economic science from the University of Warwick in England. As I said before, she was a scholar at Chevening at Wars. That this is a program that the UK government has to develop global leaders. She's also a professor in the Platzi in growth marketing course, and she was also an instructor in neuromarketing at the Unitech. She has experience with TDX conference and events, and she was an administrative coordinator at Gildan, a textile manufacturing company that owns more than 11 brands. Thank you so much, Sofía, for being here. Before I give you the floor, I just want to remind everyone that you can follow us on social media. You can also contact us through emails, and we'll be happy to answer all your questions. And you can also visit our website at ticamericas.net or YABT.net. And also at the end of the session, we'll have a small section for Q&A where you can ask all the questions that you want to Sofía. Thank you so much, Sofía, for being here, and the floor is yours.
Hi, Andrea. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. So to everyone, I'm going to start sharing my screen in just a second, when you stop sharing. Okay, perfect. So I'll start by sharing my screen. Just let me know when you're able to see it so we can kick off the session.
We can see it. It's
perfect. Yes. So as Andrea was mentioning, I'm here today to talk to you about market research and to give you just a brief introduction on the topic. So I just want to walk you a little bit on how this session is going to go. First, we're going to talk about the research problem. Then we're going to proceed and talk about how we can design our own market research. Then we're going to discuss some of the different types of research, and we'll then go over some of the tools that we can use to do research on our own. So first of all, let's start by providing a small definition on what is market research. Market research can be defined as basically the systematic gathering and interpretation of information about individuals or organizations, where we actually use statistical and analytical methods, and we use also other techniques from applied sciences, as you will be seeing more like a little bit ahead in the slides, to be able to get some insights about our consumers, and this is of course to support business decision making. So now, just for you to have an idea of how important market research is, an annual revenue of market research companies stands at $73.38 billion. Just for you to have an idea of how much, I mean, imagine if that is their revenue, imagine just how much companies actually spend on research. So we have an idea of who is spending research as well and how critical it is. We can see that some of the top companies around the world are also the highest investors in research and development. So these are numbers taken from Statista in 2018, where we see that, I mean, no surprise there, but companies like Amazon and Alphabet, the parent company of Google, just spend billions of dollars in research per year. So now you may be asking yourself exactly what is the benefit or what are the benefits of market research in itself? So first of all, market research, by giving us information, it helps us meet our consumers' needs. When we're able to get to know our target, when we're able to understand their pain points, what they want and what they would actually desire in a product, and we're able to design products accordingly and to make smart marketing and business decisions. So then this takes me to the next benefit. With market research, by having information, it's not small to say that information is power. We're able to manage our business risks because we can avoid overinvesting or underinvesting in something, or even carrying out a project that won't really make any financial sense for the company. We can also, along the way, discover new products and business models as we understand our consumer even deeper. And then finally, of course, it's never you can never have really too much information to carry out your business decision. So you can just have data-driven decision making in the company. So basically in market research, we see two primary functions. First of all, we have research that can be used to identify problems. This particular kind of research just focuses on understanding consumers, trends, and forces in the market. With this particular research, we want to actually understand what is going on. We try to see what is the problem. It's as if you're not really clear on what is the problem that your business is facing. So you have to start really talking to consumers, listening to understand what exactly is going on. So you have an intuition that something happens, but you're not really sure what it is. So then when you know what it is, then you have basically a problem solving research. This particular research, you're basically stress testing different parts of your market of like the variables from your marketing mix. So let's say product pricing, place, promotion. You're basically just looking at all the components of your marketing and testing them with actual consumers to drive marketing decisions, because then you're able to know what works and what doesn't. So now let's go over a little bit about what is the market research process look like. So first of all, we need to define the problem and the approach that we will be taking to tackle that particular problem. Then we design the research in itself. Afterwards, we do data collection, then we analyze that data and we communicate the findings. In this particular presentation, we're going to focus on steps 1 and 2 because those would be the more critical for you. Step 3 and 4, step 4 would basically be a whole another session. But then, that's when you use sophisticated statistical methods in themselves. Anyway, so we're going to start talking about the research problem right now. So what do I want to state clearly at this point? Basically, before you even start doing any research, before you design any survey, you have to be really clear on what is the business problem that you're trying to tackle. So you need to specify it as clearly as possible. Why? Because if we do not define this research problem properly, we can end up having delays in developments, delays in tackling a particular issue. We will, of course, spend unnecessary financial resources, which as entrepreneurs are already scarce. Then we can also have misguided decision making if we carry out the research, but then by not defining it properly, we're not getting the results that we need, and we may get results that are misleading for us in decision making. So why do I include this particular image here? Basically, for you guys, for those of you that may be familiar with the book Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy from Douglas Adams, there's a very famous thing in the novel where they ask a supercomputer what is the meaning of life, and then the answer is 42. So this really tells you that if you don't ask the right question, you're not also going to get the right answer. So I mean, it is a funny example, but it really sort of drives home the fact that if you want good answers, you also need to ask good questions. And this is all what market research is about when you're starting with the process. So now, how can we actually define this problem properly? We need to consider 3 particular aspects. First of all, we need to go through the environmental context. By this, I am talking that you need to understand what surrounds your business problem. So in this case, you may be having discussions with stakeholders at your company, which if you're a small entrepreneurship, that could mean your co-founders, some of your early customers. These could be some of the stakeholders that you could talk to start getting an idea of what context is surrounding your problem. You could also have interviews with experts or with other founders, with other people who are involved in your industry, and also take a look at secondary data. Then We also need to consider what exactly is the marketing decision problem. By this, I mean, what do you want to do with the information? What do you need to do with it? What sort of what would be the output of your research? Are you going to change something in your marketing mix? Are you going to change the communication message? Are you going to change the color of a packaging, for example? Then this takes you to the market research problem. So basically, this asks you, what is the information that this decision maker might need, and then how can it be actually obtained? So basically, the interrelationship between these three elements is the one that's going to give you what is your research problem clearly defined. So then, once you have a clear idea of what is the problem that you are facing up against, you start talking about what is the approach that you're going to take to solve this problem. So this can take you through theoretical frameworks first to be able to define, what theory are you going to base your research on, then what sort of analytical models you are going to be tackling, what are the research questions you are going to ask, and what hypotheses are you going to develop. Of course, this will be more or less complex depending on, of course, the methods that you use and the complexity of your problem in itself, because no problem is, there is not a one size fits all solution. So before we jump into the design, I want to talk a little bit about what are the different types of data. So first, we have primary data. This is basically data that will usually be produced by yourself or by an external agency. This is basically data that is produced to answer your particular research problem and not something that is previously available. In secondary data, then we have data that has already been collected, but that was probably collected for a problem that is different than the one that you may be facing. Then we also have market intelligence, which are basically qualified observations of events and developments that happen in the marketing environment. This is not as structured as secondary data. So to give you an example, in secondary data, we may find these famous surveys, like, for example, the Barometer of the Americas. We may also find something like the World Values Survey, things like this, that are, they're really good databases, very robust, and they are also conducted regularly, so they are updated regularly. And this is the kind of data that you would like to ideally find in terms of secondary data. So now secondary data can take the form of being internal or external. In terms of internal data, we basically find data that is ready to use or that could require processing. This is usually the case when you have a company that may have, we could say, like a market research area within the company itself. In terms of external research, you may find already published material. You may also find computerized databases or syndicated research services. Now, to start talking a bit about the research design, we're going to go through some of the different types of research that we can do. So first of all, I want to outline what are the components of a research design. We need to first state what is the information that we need. Then we define the type of design that we will be doing. That could be exploratory, descriptive, or causal. Then we jump to define what are the techniques that we are actually going to be using to understand and measure this data. And finally, we build what is going to be the data collection tool and our analysis plan. So something that I want to consider at this rate is that while you're designing your research and thinking how you're going to carry things through, how you're going to tackle the problem, you need to think about your participants. First of all, think about where this participant is. What is their environment? What surrounds them? How are you going to be able to reach them? Then you need to understand as well, how does the participant perceive the problem? How do they see it? And then what is the nature of the participant themselves? By this, I mean, what is basically their age, their gender, who are they, where do they usually work? Just try to get as much information as possible about your consumer. So let's dig into exploratory research at this rate. First of all, exploratory research, this is basically research that is undertaken to provide insights and an understanding of marketing phenomena. Usually, this research is something that you would do before undertaking further critical research, but sometimes you can solve a research problem on its own just with this particular kind of research. Usually, it is used for two main reasons. First, you may try to define the problem more precisely because, as I said before, defining the problem is critical, or even just to get some more background information on the problem. Now, we also have descriptive research, which as its name states, basically it's about being able to describe a particular phenomena, such as who is the consumer of a particular product, what are the types of sales going on. Those are examples of things where you would be just mainly trying to describe the sample. then usually this particular research may need a planned and structured design. Now, a third type of research that we may differentiate is causal research. This particular research, as also its name hints to us, we're basically trying to find what is the cause and effect relationship between the sort of decisions that we are doing with our marketing, with our products, and then the reaction of consumers. So we want to understand with this research, what is the role of each variable and what is the effect of those actions that we're undertaking. We also want to understand what is the nature of that relationship, because it's not sufficient to say there is a relationship. We need to know what kind of relationship it is. Is it a positive or a negative relationship? Finally, we also need to be able to, this can also help us test hypotheses. So we can start talking now about going deeper in those types of research that we can do. I'm going to start off with qualitative research, which, as you may imagine, or well, you can basically deduce this from the fact that I'm a behavioral scientist. It's one of my favorites because in this particular research, you basically draw insights and tools from psychology, ethnography, and sociology. So this particular research, usually it can be unstructured, but you can add structure to it, of course. You can also, you basically have primarily exploratory designs. You tend to use small samples, and this is basically done to provide more depth, insight, and understanding of the problem. So basically, one of the first techniques that is used within qualitative research are focus groups. In focus groups, you basically have a discussion that is conducted by a moderator. This is usually tried to do in the most natural manner possible, preferably not too structured, but as I will tell you, there is a sort of structure at the end, and usually do this with a small group of participants. The typical duration, it could be from like an hour and a half to 6 hours, but I mean, I would never do something that lasts so long, but it depends on the research problem, the context, and everything else. Usually, I would say that it's safe to do a session that is about an hour long, because that is as much as people's attention can be held and where you can have a lively session going on. Usually, you would have a group of about 6 to 10 people whose composition would be homogeneous. Because why do I say homogeneous at this rate? Because when you start doing this particular kind of research, let's say you have 2 or 3 different market segments. So you may start off by, let's say, having a focus group with one of the segments, then with another, and then with a third one. Why would you proceed this way? Basically, when you start talking to one segment at a time, you're able to see what are the differences between those groups and whether they behave differently, they have different opinions. So that's why it's important to first of all start having sessions with each group, and then later on you can do a combined session with several segments to see how the discussion proceeds. You, of course, try to do this in a natural manner so that people can't really guess what you're getting at exactly, because if you give out too much about what your research is or what you're exactly trying to find out, then you may have some bias in terms of behavior. The setting usually tends to be something very relaxed. You try to make them feel comfortable. You usually have some sort of refreshment for participants, and you typically record sessions. You can also have these groups online or offline. Why would you record a session in this case? Usually, as you're moderating, and this may be the case since most of you are entrepreneurs, you may be the one who is moderating and who's then processing the data. So it happens, because I have been on that end. When you're doing the moderation, you sometimes don't catch everything, especially from all participants. So when you're able to record, you're able to replay, to see things, to analyze body language, and to look at small, subtle cues that may have escaped you in the first session. So that's why it's very important if you're able to do some kind of recording of the session. Then how would you conduct exactly a focus group in a step-by-step manner? First of all, we would need to understand what are the market research problems and objectives that we have. Then we would need to see what exactly is the objective that we want to fulfill from those with the focus group. Then we would need to see what is the sample that we want for this focus group, the location where we will have the session. Finally, we need to recruit participants, and we run an experimental group, and we conduct the focus group. Why would it be important at this rate to highlight the fact that we need to do experimentals, like experimental groups or experimental surveys? You want to pilot test your research designs and your questionnaires, because then you're able to understand whether there is something wrong with them, whether the session feels unnatural. So it's always good, even though it might feel like an unnecessary step when you're pressed with time and with needs from your business. It is always good that you try and make space to be able to test what you're going to ask people and what is the structure of the session that you are planning. Now, we can jump into another kind of qualitative technique, which is in-depth interviews. In this case, you basically have a one-on-one session with someone where usually you have a trained interviewer and you have a person from your focus group or that represents a particular target. And what you're basically trying to do is to uncover in this session what are their motivations, beliefs, attitudes, or feelings about a topic. Usually, these sessions may last 30 minutes to an hour. It really depends on the time of the subject that you are having the interview with. You also tend to basically have one or more sessions because, of course, if it's someone who is really busy, you may only be able to get about 15 or 10 minutes of their time, and you may have to book additional sessions. As I mentioned, usually this is a one-on-one session. You also try to make the person feel comfortable because you need to ensure that they want to speak up. You need to consider the topic you're approaching with them, and you will also typically try to record this session as well to be able to understand what cues or what things lie behind, their body language and things that you may have not caught on the first instance. So, what are some tips that you need to follow as an interviewer? First of all, I would, and this is key, at the beginning, you need to try to develop empathy with the participant. Like you need to try to create a bond, to form a connection so that like things flow easily and naturally between you and him or her. This person, it is very important that he or she is relaxed and comfortable, as I mentioned, so that they are willing to share more details. Also, something else is that while you're doing the interview, you would need to see what sort of things or questions get more response from the participants so that you are able to develop questions around these issues in particular. So that's why it is largely said that these sessions tend to be unstructured. But my recommendation is to always have at least a set of questions and an ideal flow as the session. Of course, as you're progressing through the session, you will naturally end up changing the order of questions or how you ask things depending on how it evolves. But it's never a good idea to just jump without a clear sense of what you're going to ask or what you want out of the session. Just bear in mind that it will end up being sort of flexible as you progress through the interview. Then another thing that is key is that you shouldn't just let the person cut it at yes or no. You should try to go deeper. Let's say if you ask them like, what do you like? Like, do you like Louis Vuitton, for example? They might say yes, but you wouldn't just leave it at yes. You would just try to ask why. How did it start? How did you start getting to know the brand? When was the first time you purchased this brand, for example? So you would try to always go deeper. And then when you'll be able to also notice, and this is something that comes from experience, when people are not exactly being as clear as they should be when they're explaining something. So once you get this feeling, you'll be able to just probe a little bit deeper and ask a little bit more why, how, what took you there, how did you get there, how did you try this product. You're just going to end up naturally developing this sort of sense. So now there's another technique, as I was mentioning, that is super interesting, which is all these techniques that we can encompass under ethnography. As I just mentioned, this is a range of methods basically, and usually it requires for a researcher to spend a long time observing a group of people or even immersing themselves in their way of life. This is basically really literally getting into the shoes of your consumer by spending time with them, by observing them. And of course, this may sound as unrealistic for an entrepreneur, but I'll give you an example. Let's say you're trying to design a co-working space, for example. Ethnography would be something like going to the co-working space and spending a few days there, asking people how they feel and just observing people, how they behave. Is there something that should be changed there, etc.? So usually you would focus on a group of people in particular or on a target segment. You would try to use a natural environment, and this can also take us to another interesting concept, which is ethnography, and this basically consists of observing behavior, but in a digital space. So you may also be observing behavior in Facebook groups, or perhaps in, you could say, WhatsApp groups or things like this. There are plenty of environments where we can actually observe consumer behavior and get valuable insights for our products. So now, to start talking about quantitative research, these are basically research techniques that would try to quantify data and apply statistical analyses, mathematical models. You would include and see things like surveys as well. So let's go a little bit deeper into surveys. Basically, a survey is a structured questionnaire that you administer to a sample of a target population, and you try to get a particular set of information from these participants. The types of surveys that we see are online surveys, telephone surveys, and face-to-face surveys. Usually, we have several types of questions in a single survey. We can have scale questions that go, for instance, when they ask you to rate something from 1 to 5, or to explain whether something is good or very good. You tend to have a scale in these particular questions. Then you also have open-ended questions that are those that, for example, why do you like X brand? And then you let consumers basically write expansively or as much as they want about a particular topic. Then you also have multiple choice questions when you already have like predefined questions of which they can choose several, as the name implies. Or where you just give them different choices and they're able to choose one. This really depends on what you are tackling, right? So now the kind of question that you're going to ask is of course driven by the sort of information that you need, just so you can bear that in mind. And now something important is that when we are designing this questionnaire, similar to like the guide for focus groups, we need to first start with what is the information that we need, what is the kind of interview method that we are going to be using. Then we have to understand what is going to be the content of questions, what are the constraints that our participants have, and then what is going to be that structure for that particular question. So some interesting tips so that you're able to write better questions. First of all, you need to define the issue properly that you want to tackle in the question. You need to try to use normal everyday words that are not really that don't confuse people. That's why you also need to avoid unambiguous, you need to avoid ambiguous words. You also need to avoid biasing or leading people into thinking or knowing what you want out of a particular survey. You also need to avoid implicit alternatives and assumptions, or even generalizations and estimates. And you need to also balance between positive and negative statements accordingly. As I mentioned, there is not exactly like a one size fits all or as a clear rule. It really depends on the research question and what you are trying to achieve. So another thing that's interesting is observation. This is also part of the quantitative set of tools. Basically, here we record the behavioral patterns of people, objects, and events in a systematic way. And this can be done through personal observation, where we basically have people recording and what is the phenomenon that is occurring. Then we may also have electronic observations where we can use technology to be able to track behavior in real time, such as eye tracking, for example. Or you can even have, for instance, trace analysis, where you see like clues in the environment of how people are behaving or using something. So let's say that you're at a museum and you see that there are scratches in a particular part of a door, you can then assume that probably people keep bumping into this particular area. Or in airplanes, for example, I mean, I know it's been a while since anyone's able to really travel, but usually when you go on an airplane and you see, let's say, the remote controls on the entertainment seats, you tend to see that some of them have chinks or scratches in some areas. This is because sometimes people get confused when they're trying to free the control, and that's why they mistakenly try to grab it from the wrong end, thereby causing this particular scratches, for instance. So if you're observant enough, you're able to see that objects speak for themselves, sometimes more than people. That's why it's very interesting to keep an eye out on what exactly is surrounding your target. And now we're just going to go over a few tools that you can use for research. I'm mainly going to focus here on survey tools because this is the most common sort of research type that you'll probably be using for your own projects. So some tools that have like a free or premium options include Google Forms, which is one of the friendliest ones that I can recommend for entrepreneurs that are starting out with their businesses. You also have more sophisticated options like Qualtrics, and you have also options like SurveyMonkey and Typeform that may offer some free packages or some reasonably priced alternatives as well. And now, some references that you may use is, first of all, most of the material prepared for this presentation has been done with the Market Research and Applied Approach 5th edition by Naresh Malhotra. And also Small Data from Martin Lindstrom. This is a very nice book where you're able to see some examples of ethnographic research and how this basically drove insights for business. Now, in case you want to reach out on LinkedIn, you can find me as Sofía Maradiaga. I place my details on the chat as well. And with that, I'm done. Basically, you can just ask any question right now. We can talk a little bit more about what are your ideas, what are you doing, and where are you stuck with research. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, Sophia, for your presentation. It was really useful. Now we'll open our session of Q&A. So I want to remind everyone that you can send your questions through the chat, or you can also raise your hand and we'll open the microphone for you. So Sophia, here we have one from HR Mejia. Thank you, HR Mejia, for being here and for your questions. He says, "Hi Sophia, I find this topic so complex. Do you think it's better if I contact a company to do the market research for me? Greetings from Brazil."
Hi. So, well, that really depends on budget. What I would say is if, I mean, let's say very basic surveys or things that are really related, like that are not too complex about your business, you can definitely try to do something on your own, perhaps, because you can, just pilot test. There are a lot of online resources. But if you do have the resources, and let's say your time is more valuably invested in other parts of the business, then by all means you could use a market research agency. If you don't have the resources, though, I would encourage to give the method a shot, because this is something that you start learning as you're basically progressing on a journey. So it is worth a shot, basically, because you're able to learn on the way and to change things and understand as you make your way through this. You're on mute, Andrea.
Sorry.
No worries.
Thank you so much. Here we have another one. So how many people should I interview to consider my market research valid?
Well, that really depends on the question, because as I was mentioning, for example, if you're doing, let's say, like focus groups, you would typically have groups of 6 to 10 people. How many focus groups you do per segment, that really depends on when you feel comfortable that you've obtained enough data to answer your question. Because as I tell you, as a question gets more complex, you may have to even do additional research. So in terms of interviews, sometimes you're dealing with very small samples. In that case, what I would say is just try to get as many as possible, and try to be like answering each component of your question, because the core thing is, it's not like the more the merrier approach exactly, but rather, am I getting the data that I need? Am I getting sufficient information? And bearing in mind that you will have to basically be doing additional research in the future, because just as businesses change, people change, trends change, so it won't be that you'll do one and you'll be done forever, right? You'll probably have to repeat this in 1 or 2 years.
Perfect, thank you. Here we have some other comments from J.R. Mejia, thank you. But what if I do not the technical, what if do not the technical knowledge to it? I have an entrepreneurship, but I am an engineer, so I don't know much about the administrative issues.
In that case, what I would say is, like, I mean, if you really don't feel confident about doing it yourself, then by all means try to find someone that can help you with research. This could not only be like an agency, you could also try to find like independent consultants, just in case because through this kind of people you're able to get better prices than at agencies, because usually research agencies tend to be quite expensive. So you could also just try other entrepreneurs that may do like research methods on the side, so that would really help you in case you really don't have the skills. Or also, if you have other business partners in your in within your business, you may be able to get a partner that is able to do this as well. This is, of course, I mean, I'm saying this bearing in mind that with entrepreneurship, it really gets tough sometimes to be able to fund research. So maybe that could be something like going for a private consultant that may offer you a cheaper price, or even getting someone on your team that is able to do this. You could also, and this just came up as an idea, you could also try to reach out to local universities. They sometimes they offer, or you're able to just try to get some support from business students who are actively looking for ways to do a business project or like a market research project. This was something that happened to me actually when I was studying marketing and business. We had to sometimes find a business with a problem and help them solve it through research, and we would get information from our professors. We would also get coaching. So in the end, you would get like really decent research done, basically. So that is another sort of idea. This is, as I tell you, thinking that you might have to be scrappy about resources.
Perfect. Here we have another one from Mauricio Vasquez. Thank you. how do I can get people for the interviews or focus group? It is necessary to pay them?
Well, usually you would try to contact people depending on, I mean, on who they are. You may have to basically try to use LinkedIn, for example, or if, let's say, you're recruiting a target that is less corporate, what I would do usually is to try to like leverage online communities to find people, or you could also use, there are some platforms like Prolific, for example. There's also Mechanical Turk. There are platforms where you can recruit participants, but usually you can get pretty far just by going online, asking, let's say you're trying to find young mothers. Let's say if you find two or three of them, if you ask them to be able to refer you to others, you could definitely end up getting or finding more people similar to those. So this is one way. You can also just get help from, let's say, friends, family members, or also from your online communities to be able to share surveys. And you just include filter questions so that you can basically reach your target segment. And then for, let's say, is it necessary to pay? Yes, it depends. Sometimes you're able to just, a lot of people are actually very willing to help when you state your problem, you state what you're trying to do, that you're an entrepreneur. When you usually state these reasons, most people are actually willing to spare, 15, 30 minutes. So you can actually get pretty far, believe me, when you're like asking people if they are willing to talk about a particular problem. So sometimes it's not necessary, but of course, if you're trying to do something very structured and it's a big project, you will definitely have to pay them at some point. This is, as I tell you, thinking about the entrepreneurship sort of part. But usually, if it's a very professional and big project, you'll pay participants so that you're able to have more of their time.
Thank you, Sophia. Okay, so here we have a comment. Yes, we will share the recording. It will be on our website, ticamericas.net/thebootcamp. So there you can find the recording of this session. And here I have another one. So it says, what happened when the results of the market study say that the group of clients I was thinking of selling are not interested in my products? Should I change the product and adapt it to what they are looking for, or should I look for another potential market?
I mean, that really depends on what would be the difference that you found between what exactly is their pain point, because you would need to understand whether the changes are feasible or if you're actually just going to a totally different segment. So you would have to see what makes more sense, because what I would think is that if I'm seeing that the people I had originally thought are not the right ones, then I would look for clues within the data that I've gathered that might tell me who is this person, or when I say who is this person, it's like who is this target market. Or I would alternatively see whether these changes are feasible or not, because if it's too many changes, you might just want to go to a different market, basically, because then you might be seeing that who you thought would be your market is actually not. So there's not like a clear cut answer. It's something that you would need to really look at and see whether it's feasible changes, not too many of them, and then whether there are clues in the research that you're just entirely going to a different target. That's what I can think of just based on your question in general.
Thank you so much, Sophia, for your time, for your answers, for everything. Now we'll pass to the conclusion part. And while we are making the conclusion, we'll make a small survey to our audience so we can improve our bootcamps and see what you think about what we are doing. So if you can start with some conclusion words, that will be nice.
Perfect. So thank you everybody for taking part in the session, and you can definitely reach me on LinkedIn. I can post on my profile here in case you may have additional questions. And what I would say is market research is also all about curiosity. It's also all about being patient and understanding that with your first research project, it won't be perfect and it may not answer all questions. And this is something that you'll have to be doing regularly. As I showed you with companies, they regularly have to be investing in research to be able to improve and to, just get better at what they do, or to find new businesses. So just let me get my link here to be able to share. Just a minute. And I'm more than happy to answer questions over LinkedIn. And I regularly post content there related to research, marketing, and behavioral science.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Sophia. Thank you so much to all of our attendees. We hope you enjoyed the session, and we'll see you in the next session. Thank you.
See you. Bye.